The good thing about being a lawyer, well, I shouldn't say this because I'm a contingency plaintiff's attorney, so you do take a lot of risk doing this job, and you can put in a lot of money in cases. But I guess the only other job you can do that as a trader, you can walk in the morning and then walk out in the afternoon with less money than you came in with, and that's the danger of trading. Any other job, at least you can have the worst day in the world. At least you've made some money that day just from purely clocking in and clocking out. But as a trader, you can walk out 100 grand poor at the end of the day if you're not careful. So.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. Excited about today's guest. That's a good friend of mine, Colin Ram. He is a personal injury lawyer based out of Charleston, South Carolina, but he did not take your traditional route into the plaintiff's personal injury side. Usually you start out insurance defense and you go that way. Well, he started uber big law in DC doing big time stuff. So we'll dive into that. But Colin, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your practice.
Thank you, Jonathan. Happy to be here. Yeah, I do. I'm a plaintiff side trial attorney, and I specialize in personal injury, civil rights, and also some fraud cases. So whether that's key tam fraud or business fraud. Based here in Charleston, South Carolina. It's a great place. We moved down here about 6.5 years ago, and I opened up my firm. I was just checking the calendar 7 months and 3 days ago. So I'm really kind of at the beginning stages of running my own shop, but so far so good.
That's the cool thing about this podcast. I like to interview folks all along the timeline from, basically selling their practice and doing whatever they're going to do to just starting. So you're on the front end. So I want to really dig into sort of your experiences there. I know a little bit, but I want to hear more. So before we do all that, man, I want to go way back. I want to get your story before you went to law school. My understanding, you were in the Navy way back when?
I was after 9/11. I signed up like a lot of folks did, back then, and I was in the Navy Reserve. I was enlisted, becoming an intelligence specialist and doing a lot of counterterrorism work there. So, and that was all based in Chicago. I was living in Chicago at the time. I was trading at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, joined the Navy Reserve, ended up doing had to go for training to Dam Neck, Virginia, and to the Intel School and a number of other places, but it was a great experience.
All right. Well, I want to dive into that, but maybe I got it all wrong. So I guess you graduated, then you went to undergrad, then you went to be a floor trader, then the Navy, or was it vice versa?
Yeah, my path to where I am today is definitely a windy road. I graduated college at American University in Washington, D.C. My first job out of college was a bartender. And
nice.
Which, again, it was a fantastic job. It continues to pay benefits in terms of just sitting there and talking to clients today, right? But I did that for a year. I was trading. Don't ask me how I got involved in trading commodity futures. My brother was in that business, and so he was out in Chicago, and he told me, hey, man, you got to come out here, work on the trading floor before they shut it down. And I did. I moved out there to Chicago in 1999. I got a job on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I was a runner, which is the lowest level job you can get there on the floor. And I was running trading cards in the trading pit to, different desks and trying to tick and tie and make sure everything was correct. And that was a trial by fire. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, that was the environment where everyone's just yelling and screaming and just having a normal conversation, but yelling and screaming and moving their hands around. So it took several months just to get used to the work environment. But man, it was fantastic.
So you're running around yelling or other people yelling and hand you the tickets? How did that work?
So it started out, I was the one being yelled at, right? And eventually I worked my way up and I became a trader on the floor there. And I was doing some arbitrage work. We're trading the commodity futures on the computer screen against what was going on the trading floor. There's some arbitrage you could do there. And it was fantastic. And actually, it's very intense work. The great part about it is when the bell rings at the end of the trading day, you go home and that's it. There's very few times where you're doing anything else. You're not taking work home with you. It all stays on the trading floor. So I miss those days for sure.
So what were you trading? I mean, all sorts of commodities. What do you mean by that? I mean,
So it was the S&P 500 futures and the NASDAQ 100 futures. And so these are future contracts. What's the future value of the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ? I also traded, part of my time there, I did government securities, or we're trading government bonds. We're trading anything that you can trade, overnight in, the oil, coffee, sugar, cocoa. You're trading currencies. For a couple of years, I worked the overnight, where I was doing sort of like a third shift, coming in at 10 o'clock at night, working till 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. This is off the trading floor. And you're just trading worldwide markets. And, it's a young person's game. It takes a lot of, it's a tough lifestyle, but it was a lot of fun. There's a lot of great people out in Chicago who are doing that.
So do you still keep up with markets? Do you trade now or?
Not, there's somewhat this new generation, right? Particularly with like, Bitcoin and, people who are just trading some very esoteric products right now. I am in touch with a number of people who I knew on the floor, and we sort of stay in contact and talk about the old days. But I don't do it. I don't actively trade right now. Like everyone else, just invest. You go get your Vanguard S&P 500 index fund and just go. It's the much more relaxing and less stressful way of doing things.
I imagine this sort of thing, you got to do it all the time or maybe not at all. I bet it's something that's probably hard to dabble in, I would think, but you tell me.
It is hard to dabble in because there's so many different factors. I mean, you're trying to figure out what the Fed's going to do with interest rates. You're trying to, figure out what earnings season's looking like. You're trying to get a bead on the economy, but you're also just looking at technical indicators. And so you really have to follow a lot. When most of the products were trading on the trading floor, and that's where the volume and all the activity was, it was a much more controlled environment. And you didn't have to worry about other things that were going on because everything filtered through the floor first. Now something can happen overseas and the market's going to move before you even realize it. And then you have to figure out why it moved and does that impact your position? And it's a much more intense setup, I think, that people have to do. You see these pictures of these traders who have 6 screens and everything. It's like, you kind of need to have that. You need to be watching everything at once. So those were fun days, but those are behind me now.
Yeah, so you do the less stressful job of being a lawyer nowadays. So
yeah, the good thing about being a lawyer, well, I shouldn't say this because I'm a contingency plaintiff's attorney, so you do take a lot of risk doing this job, and you can put in a lot of money in cases. But I guess the only other job you can do that as a trader, you can walk in the morning and then walk out in the afternoon with less money than you came in with, and that's the danger of trading. Any other job, at least you can have the worst day in the world. At least you've made some money that day just from purely clocking in and clocking out. But as a trader, you can walk out $100,000 poor at the end of the day if you're not careful. So
reminds me of a casino floor.
Yeah. Although we don't call it gambling. It was much more,
right. Yeah.
We manage the risk, which you can't do in a casino. But we manage the risk. So, but there's a number of like buddies of mine who just became great poker players. It went to the World Series of Poker just because they knew money management and they knew risk management. And poker, I guess, is the only game of skill out in Vegas.
You mentioned Bitcoin. There was a guy I heard on podcast a while back, can't remember, but who grew up, I think, trading commodities, and now he does some sort of crypto type trading something. And he said that the concepts from the commodities trading really work well, or he's figured out a way to make them work well for the crypto stuff, whatever, beyond my field of knowledge, but I thought that was pretty interesting. So you're a floor trader, then 9/11 happens and you decide to go into the Navy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I joined the Navy Reserve, so I continued trading on the floor, went to boot camp, and became a reservist in the Navy at the time. So it was kind of pursuing both paths in parallel. And it was purely just, like I said, a lot of people after 9/11, you're trying to figure out what you can do, how you can help, how you can serve. And, the military was like, come on over. So that's what I did.
So you might not be able to talk about it much, but when you say you did intelligence, did you pick that or did they steer you there? How did you get into that and sort of what does that mean?
Yeah, so that was part of the discussion with the recruiter, and they had a need at the time. They were looking for, when you join the military, they tell you what they need, and they don't really give you an option. And it just so happened they had, they said, hey, look, and we're looking for people like you who can do intelligence. If you sign up, that will be your sort of your career path in the Navy to do that. And so that part was guaranteed, subject to passing, the background check and getting the top secret clearance. And that was great work. I mean, half of it is utterly boring, to dispel the truth about it. You're just sort of, you're looking at a lot of meaningless stuff and trying to make sense of stuff. And some of it's just, there's nothing there. And then other times ships going into port in some country on the other side of the world, and you have to analyze all the threat traffic, message traffic. So-and-so is a source for somebody else, and they said X, Y, and Z, and you have to take that and integrate it into everything else you're hearing, and you prepare a threat assessment for the ship. And, the ship has to decide how they're going to protect their sailors when they go into a port. And that's just one example of the type of work I was doing over there. So it was pretty analytical. And I actually, started law school in 2005 when I was in the Navy. So that was a little bit of a juggling act. The great thing about it was they allowed me to do both at the same time. So I would, instead of having to go in that one weekend a month for your drill weekend, I would come back Thanksgiving and Christmas and just, I would make the trip from Lexington, Virginia. I went to W&L Law School. And as soon as we got out for Thanksgiving break, I'd get in the car, drive my 12 hours over to Chicago, crash at my brother's sister's house. And then the next morning I was out, in uniform at a skiff working all throughout the holidays, just to put in my time. And so I did that for a while, for several years, juggling both law school and the Navy. And it was great. I mean, I certainly enjoyed it.
Sounds like some of this intelligence assessment, whatever it is, synthesis of information, sounds like that's a good training ground for, working a case. You got to pull in all the facts, sort of create your story or whatever you're going to do. I mean, is there any overlap there?
No, I think there's a lot of overlap there, come to think about it, just the type of thing you're doing. You're getting incomplete information. So you think about it in terms of litigating a case. You get discovery answers, you get some deposition testimony, you get inconsistent witness testimony, and you're trying to make sense of it and figure out what the case is and where it's going. And that's very similar to at least what I was doing. My role in the Navy was just trying to take all this disparate information and put together something that you hope is correct. So there is definitely that parallel between that work. I think litigating is much more interesting and exciting than the naval intelligence stuff personally. So maybe that's why I'm a lawyer now and not an admiral. But
well, if you were still in the Navy, you'd be in New Jersey analyzing those orbs, right? Or the drones.
Yeah, well, I'm also a pilot, and I'm pretty sure that those things are just airplanes flying through the sky with lights.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. So why law school? You're on the trading floor, you're in the Navy. Why law school?
So there's two experiences that I can kind of go back to the trading floor, right? One of them, there's one day the markets, like I said, we were trading on the computer screen, and you're doing this arbitrage where you're buying something on the computer screen and you're trying to sell it on the floor because there's a price differential and you're trying to capture that. And there was one day on the trading floor where the markets on the computer screen went way off from where the trading floor was. And I was executing trades for somebody, a customer of mine who's another trader on the floor. And he made, 40 grand on a trade in a matter of like 2 minutes due to the price discrepancy. And, all of a sudden, everybody on the trading floor, you convene this, what they call a pit committee, to figure out, we got a big problem here. The markets are way off. We need to correct this, figure out what's going to do. Do we cancel trades and that type of thing? And I got into it. You're having this pit committee. So you got a couple hundred people who are trying to figure out what the outcome's going to be. And there's a small group of people, and I'm out there just standing there in the trading pit, yelling and screaming, we should keep the trades for all these reasons. Here's the rules, everything like that. And the chairman of the exchange, this guy, Terry Duffy, came down to the floor, and he was just standing there watching. And it was one of those moments where I realized I was arguing the loudest and the longest over this particular issue. And people were agreeing with me, like, yeah, what he said. And Terry Duffy's just standing there. He's just kind of looking and nodding. And then he makes a decision. They were going to cancel the trades, which was against my position, right? And I ended up the next day, I went to his office, and he was great. I mean, he's a chairman of exchange. He brought on the president of exchange, and the three of us are just sitting there. And he completely understood my position. But he said, listen, we have to protect the integrity of the markets and the retail traders at home. And so that's why we did it. It was a business decision. It wasn't a rules-based decision. But he heard me out, and I truly respect him for doing that. But I was just excited from that accidental stepping into just standing up and arguing very, in that type of environment, which I guess would be similar to arguing a motion or arguing in front of a jury. You have a bunch of people watching you trying to judge if what you're saying is right or wrong and if you're credible and if you're believable. And that was just a fun experience. So that kind of planted the seed a little bit. And then I was in a cab. I was running late to the exchange one morning. And so I woke up. I couldn't take the L. I got into a cab, and the cab driver was listening to NPR. And they were talking about the Supreme Court case, Lawrence v. Texas, it was a case, I think it was two gay men who were having sex in their house, and they're inside their house, their private home. And somebody had called 911, and I think the police had busted down the door and arrested them because they were violating Texas state law. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, wow, like that's what the Supreme Court does. I didn't know anything about, what courts do other than what you just see on TV. And I thought it was a very just sort of unusual and interesting case. And it ended up being like a pretty, major case in Supreme Court jurisprudence, right? And so I think they were arguing or they were talking about that particular case. And then I ended up like going online and just reading some of these like Supreme Court decisions. And at the same time, this is a time during the global war on terror, and you have these enemy combatants, these folks who are captured on the battlefield outside the United States, and do we take them down to Guantanamo Bay? All these questions were like questions of first impression for everybody. Is it legal? Do they have constitutional rights? Do they not have constitutional rights? And so all that stuff, I just started following it and just getting interested in it. And I kind of realized there's sort of two events. One, trading on the floor was really kind of diminishing. The volume was moving more to the computer screens or electronic trading. And, I was getting more and more interested in what was going on kind of in current events with, the terrorist stuff, with what we're doing, how do you handle these tough legal questions that there's really no clear answer to? Everything from like a torture memo to, enemy combatants and that type of thing. And so I ended up taking I had already graduated college, but I took a couple of upper level undergraduate law classes or pre-law classes at DePaul University, which is right down the street from me in Chicago, and met a great professor there. He was fantastic. And I just ate it up. I mean, I was a student in class who was sitting there in the front row, writing everything down. And I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. Like, I like this law thing. I'd never thought about it before. I didn't grow up thinking I was going to be a lawyer, but so far, so good. I was really interested in it and kind of rolled the dice. I wasn't a great student in undergrad by any stretch, so I was a little bit nervous about going to a law school. Studied my ass off for the LSAT, applied, got into Washington and Lee, and I just loved it. I mean, just no looking back. Just absolutely loved it from day one.
Did the Navy pay for this? Were you able to?
I was being paid. They didn't pay the full tuition. I was getting a monthly stipend because I was still in the reserve. So I was getting some partial GI Bill money, but it was basically paying for, dinner outs, and that type of thing.
Going to the bar.
Something like that.
All right. So you graduate law school, and did you move back to DC then and go big law? Is that sort of your first job out?
Yeah. And so I graduated 2008. So I was did a summer associate at Skadden Arps in Washington, D.C. Great experience. Probably the last true summer associate summer of sort of that traditional model because the markets crashed in 2008. But so I started in October 2008 at Skadden Arps in D.C. I was in the litigation department, knew I wanted to be a litigator. And so that was great. And really, the best thing for me is I was just basically go in there and litigate cases. And, like I said, probably a month prior to joining the firm, the markets had crashed big time. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt September 15th, 2008. And so there's a lot of uncertainty in the legal market, particularly for these Wall Street, New York, white shoe firms, what was going to happen. And it just so worked out that Skadden had brought in this lateral partner who's a senior healthcare fraud, False Claims Act, QTAM defense lawyer. And he brought a bunch of cases with him and he needed a lot of help. And so I got paired up with him and it was off to the races.
Yeah, I
just
started doing that work. Time. I mean, you're lucky, it seems like maybe 2010 was the worst, but all those deferrals and, all that stuff. Did your classmates have the deferral issue or did you sort of just escape that?
Now, there was a few folks, depending on the luck of the draw, really, of which firm you went to. There was a number of folks who had deferrals. I mean, there was a couple. I know there's some big firms that went down. like that went under. So people who had offers to join a law firm came back the next year to join and the firm wasn't there, or they were there for 3 months. Yeah. There's nothing worse than, I think, graduating from law school and having the rug pulled out from underneath you.
Especially, I mean, the big firms too. I mean, making the big money, you got the big tuition you got to pay back, and then all of a sudden, boom, you got nothing. But so you get in there, you start doing big cases. What's that like in a big DC firm as a young associate? I mean, what kind of experience were you getting?
It was, you end up in that environment at that time period, you're just working nonstop. I mean, it's nights, it's weekends, get home 10, 11 o'clock on a Friday night. Then you go out, of course, right? But it was just a lot of work. And certainly the first few years, it's great because you have all this pent up energy from being in law school and you finally want to litigate and you get out there and there's these great cases, you can read about in the Wall Street Journal, the cases that you're working on, or these major SEC fraud investigations. There was actually a number of trading cases that developed over the following few years that I was brought in on because you had a bunch of traders who were alleged to have committed, various forms of fraud in the, commercial mortgage-backed securities markets and other trading things. And I spoke their language. And so we'd end up having to go through and listen to audio of traders talking on the phone and talking to each other, going through their Bloomberg messages. And I was the one person in the room who could speak that language. I knew exactly what they were doing and exactly what was going on. So that was a lot of fun, just sort of being in that environment. But big law is it's a different place. And I think for some people, it's a great environment. It was certainly great for me for the first part of my career because you learn from the best. And there's great attorneys everywhere, but there's some really good attorneys at these big law firms. And I got lucky. I worked with some name brand attorneys, got to see how they do it. And it was just fantastic.
And I imagine, getting probably a pretty good salary, living in DC, that's probably pretty damn fun too, I would imagine.
It was. And, the salary thing is funny, right? And the first 2 or 3 years is great because you can pay off the law school, right? And so you're happy about that. And then you start to realize, you start doing the math on what's your effective hourly rate, that your take home pay, right? And you realize you're working 2 jobs. You're putting the hours for 2.5, maybe, jobs, and it's not as exciting as it is, but that's why they give these salary bumps, these lockstep every year. You go from a 4th to a 5th year, you get whatever the bump is, 25, 35, 50 grand. And it just keeps you there for another year, and the mindset is, well, I'll work one more year because they're throwing a lot more money at me and I can do that. And then I'll figure out what I'm going to do next. And, slowly the golden handcuffs just start forming and it's tougher and tougher to leave. And I think for a lot of people, it can be dangerous. You can get stuck there. That's why it has a reputation. There's a lot of unhappy people who are locked into the compensation and can't afford to leave.
Well, you escaped. So tell me about that. So I know you're in Charleston now. So was there something in between, or did you go from DC to Charleston? And what was what caused you to move?
Yeah. So we moved directly from DC to Charleston, and really, the thought process of moving started in probably about 2015. So we moved here in 2018. So about 3 years before, started thinking about it. My wife and I started having kids. We've got 2 kids, a 7 and a 9-year-old now. And, we're all living in a tiny little townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia that I bought, when I was single. And then at that point, there was 4 of us in there, me, my wife, 2 young kids, 2 babies essentially, and a large golden retriever. And we're kind of like, okay, we need to get something bigger. And in DC, if you want something bigger, that means you move out about another 2 hours commute wise. And it became a question, do we really want to do this? Is this kind of where we want to raise our kids? And is this the lifestyle we really want now that we're parents? And we both decided, no, we want something different. She grew up in Florida. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky. So I think we want our kids to have a little bit smaller town type environment when they're growing up. And, it's funny, we came down here to Charleston. It was actually, this time. So today's December 30th. So we were here for New Year's Eve in 2015. So about 9 years ago. And it was great. It was beautiful. It's like it is today. It was sunny, 70 degrees out. We're there with my little girl. She's only about 5 months old at that time. And we just had this great experience, And we're like, man, this would be a great place to live. And of course, New Year's Day, I made the mistake because I'm still working at Skadden, right? I pick up my phone, 8 o'clock in the morning. We're in the hotel. I look at it and there's a message from the partner. Hey, we need you to, we need you. And it was a message to me and a bunch of other attorneys, right? We need everybody, all hands on deck to do this project. This private equity firm wanted to do a transaction by one of our clients. And because we're handling litigation for this client, we had to jump in help them go through all the due diligence. And so I spent New Year's Day of 2016 sitting in a hotel room in downtown Charleston from 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And we get another email saying, pencils down, the deal's off. So I got to bill 8 hours to this client on January 1st of 2016, on vacation with my family. And it was just miserable. And that was not an unusual occurrence, but it was sort of the confluence of being in Charleston while that happens. It's like, no, I think I just want the Charleston thing. I don't want to be sort of tethered to that. You got to drop everything whenever we say to kind of do the work. That just, I got tired of that. And so, the seed was planted at that point, and then it was working towards that goal. How do I figure out this next move? And really the big issue for me of leaving Big Law is, what do I want to do with that next step? Because leaving a firm like Skadden is great. I mean, there's plenty of doors that are wide open. They want that experience. They want the, relationships and everything that you bring with it. But for me, it was, what do I really want to do with my career? What's the next step? And I knew for a long time I wanted to get into plaintiff's work. And partially I had met Mark Lanier, the Texas plaintiff attorney, during law school. Just sort of this chance occurrence. I was invited to go to the Virginia Trial Lawyers Association meeting. I went there. He gave his opening statement from one of the first Vioxx trial, and it was fantastic. And I got to talk with him afterwards, and I was just sort of enthralled by the whole world that I saw there at this trial lawyers meeting. And so I've been kind of working my way back there, and it took 10 years. And finally I said, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I had to take the bar exam in South Carolina after practicing law for 9 years at that point, which was a miserable experience, having to sit for the bar exam for a second time after, like, I'm already licensed in 2 jurisdictions and I got to go sit and take this bar exam. But I suffered through that and got licensed in South Carolina, got admitted, and then told the folks at Skadden, hey, it's time for me and my family to make a move. And they were so supportive. I mean, they could not have been better about it. They're like, whatever you need, you want to, we've got clients down over here, there, we can make phone calls. I know, partners who are coming up to me saying, hey, I know this person 30 years ago, they lived down there. I'll reach out to them and just connect you, just so you have some people to talk to and that type of thing. So that was a great transition. And, the flip side for me was finding out where I wanted to go work. I had my South Carolina bar card, but I didn't know any lawyers in South Carolina personally. And
so before we get to that, so I'm curious. Yeah. So why Charleston? Was it because you had a good trip there, or did you make the trip because you were thinking about Charleston? I mean, was there a connection?
It was a little bit of both. There was no strong connection. My wife has family in Greenville, and a lot of them have moved to Charleston since we moved down here. But we didn't have a close network of friends or family down in Charleston. But it was definitely the environment. I mean, if you saw what we saw on that trip that we went down, and we're right here on the coast. Our house is 10 minutes door to the beach. We go there all the time. It's a great environment. We live in Mount Pleasant, which is where my office is. It's just a great place. Everything about it just checked the boxes without us really kind of thinking like, these are the boxes we need checked. It just felt right. You kind of go with your gut instinct there. And fortunately for me, I wanted to do plaintiff's work, and the plaintiff's attorney community here, the trial lawyers community, is fantastic. I mean, there are some great attorneys all over the state of South Carolina who are just welcoming. They try cases. Like, I think in a lot of jurisdictions, there's, not a lot of trials going on. There's a lot of trials here. And there's some really fantastic trial attorneys. And when I started doing my due diligence of different firms, where do I want to apply to? Who do I want to work with? There was a number of great options. I mean, you think about the whole tobacco litigation, and that was Motley Rice, the firm. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're right down the street from me. They're less than a mile away, and they took down the tobacco industry. And so there was a lot of great talent here in this town. And so, I started reaching out to people cold and just FedExing resumes and letters and trying to get meetings and working my network to see if they can introduce me to folks, and just pulled out all the stops just to meet as many people as I could. And I found this great small, 5-person plaintiff shop that had a great reputation. And I went there and, started day one, and they were great. I mean, the attorneys over there really took me under the wing. They were very much interested in learning from me, and as I was interested in learning from them. And they took me out, introduced me to a bunch of people everywhere we'd go, be like, hey, this is Colin. He just moved down here from DC, and grew my network, very quickly because of them and the relationships that they had. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, okay. So you decide you want to move to Charleston. I think by this point, you're like, okay, I want to completely switch practice areas and go to the plaintiff side. You don't know anybody in Charleston. You've gotten your bar card. You go down there, you start meeting with folks. How long did it take before you sort of found a place?
I found a place. I came down here while we're still in DC. I flew down and did a number of interviews with people, and just, Charleston is a very welcoming and friendly place. So if I'd reach out to an attorney and say, hey, listen, I'm from DC. I'm looking to move down here. I'd love to just, meet you, grab lunch, or let's do this. And, most people down here were like, yeah, sure, come on over. And so I would just tell people my story, who I am, and have great conversations with people. And they would say, oh, you know what, you should go talk to so-and-so over here. They might be looking for somebody. And so I did a little bit of that. At the same time, I had sent the firm that I eventually started, went to go work with. They had a job posting. I think it was an old job posting that they had never taken down. And so I had reached out to them, and I think they were like, well, what are we going to do with, why is this guy from DC who works at Big Law, why does he want to come down here? What are we going to do with this guy? And, but I realized that they're fantastic trial attorneys. I mean, just bringing down some huge verdicts, monster verdicts. And so I said, listen, I want to go work with these guys. So I went down there and just met with them, and we just had a face-to-face conversation, and they were like, well, let's give it a go.
It's a good lesson. I don't know if there's any, younger attorneys or law school students even that are listening, but, getting a job from, just submitting a resume on some online portal, that's really not the best way to get a job. I mean, the way you did it, go down there. I mean, you were flying down from DC, and you just meet with people, and then you meet with one, and then they tell you to meet to this other person. And eventually you sort of get to a place where you want to be. And that's a perfect example. They probably didn't really even have a position, but they made one for you, right? Sounds like it.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. I mean, I don't think they had an immediate need to hire an attorney, but I think it was a situation where they're like, well, there's not many people coming from out of state to work down in South Carolina, at least at the time. Now there is. But I think it was just sort of, we just hit it off. We had a good connection, and it was like, let's see where this can go.
Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. All right, so you land the job, you move down to Charleston. What's it like, going from, I can't even imagine how many hours you're billing at DC, 2,500, 3,000, who knows, to going down to Charleston. Number one, you switch practice areas. You're probably not billing hourly anymore. What was all that like? What was that transition like?
It was definitely a transition, but in a very good way. Not having to bill time it's amazing, not having to keep track of your time like that. For some cases we do where you can recover attorney's fees, you still keep track of your time, but not having to do that and not having to hit, there's plenty of days when I was working in DC where it'd be 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I really haven't billed time. I've done stuff, but I haven't really done billable work. And it's like, it's still in the back of your mind. Well, I need it, I want to hit 200 hours this month. And, so I guess I'm going to be here till 11. Working. And that's just the mindset. You just think in terms of billing time because that's what's expected of you. And so when you get out of that environment and you're working in a contingency fee practice, it's just such a relief not to have to do that. The other thing, which I thought was, it was sort of startling to me, we'll put it that way. So my first day at the firm down in Charleston, 5 o'clock, everyone's gone. Like right at 5 o'clock. Not only is everyone gone, I'm the only person in the office at that time. And so that was,
you're like, where's everybody? We're just getting started.
Yeah. And because people, they work to live, I guess. It's people have other things they want to do. I mean, when you're in an environment like this, you want to go out on the water, you want to go fishing, you want to go, go out on your boat, take the kids out, go to soccer practice, which is what I do now. And you just can't do that, or you really have to twist yourself in knots if you're working at a large law firm in order to do that. Whereas, down here, it's expected that you're going to live a life outside of work.
I bet you that, it sounds incredible. A lot of people would love to have that switch, but I imagine at least early on, it probably felt really weird. Like you're not working hard or something. All of a sudden you're getting home by 5:30 or so. Maybe it didn't take too long to adjust.
Well, it's funny because I think some of those habits just end up following you anyways. One of the first cases I got when I moved down here, we represented Brian Bowen, he was a college basketball player. And I don't know if you remember back in 2017, there was this bribery scheme that folks from Adidas were bribing the parents of top high school recruit basketball players. And Brian Bowen, he was one of the top recruits in the country coming out of high school. He went to go play for Rick Pitino at the University of Louisville. And before the basketball season had even started, Adidas, its folks had paid his dad some bribe money to get him there, violated the NCAA rules. It turns out there was an undercover FBI investigation going on. So there was this massive criminal case that was brought against a number of folks in the Southern District of New York, by federal prosecutors. And we represented Brian, who was the young man who was caught up in this whole bribery scheme. And so the question is, well, man, this young kid, his basketball career has been ruined. He was expected to be a one and done or two and done player and go in the NBA draft, and he couldn't do that. And so, that really caused, millions of dollars in damages to him. And so what do you do? Is that a breach of contract case? Well, he didn't really have a contract with, the athletic apparel sponsor. So we're kind of just trying to figure out what to do, what kind of case you have. Somebody has been hurt badly, but it's just sort of a non-traditional thing. And I remember waking up, I'd fallen asleep one night. I was like binge watching the show Billions back when it was on. And I woke up at like 1:30 in the morning on the couch, and I was like, and it just popped into my mind. This is RICO. This is a racketeering case that we have. And I texted the other attorney at that time, 1:30 in the morning. I was like, that's what this case is. And so I went up to New York, watched the criminal trial, was, taking notes, trying to figure out what the theory of liability was. And I put together this 200, paragraph complaint, 200-page complaint really. And we filed it in federal court here in South Carolina against Adidas and a number of, Adidas folks, whether they're employees and representatives and that type of thing. And we litigated that case for years, man. That was, you want to talk about going up against switching sides, going from being the big law attorney where you're one of 20 people on a case to being the one attorney on the other side going up against 24 attorneys. That was the case. And so I was perfectly fine in that role because I knew I'd been on the other side for so long and knew sort of all the moves that were going to be made in a case like that. And we litigated it. That was a fun case.
Well, hopefully that was a good result.
Well, it wasn't. It wasn't a good result. Ultimately, we took it up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and ultimately the issue became under the big issue that the court wrestled with and ultimately disagreed with us on is whether a college student athlete has a business or property interest in their NCAA eligibility. And I don't think you can look at college sports today and say that the answer is no to that. Courts disagreed. We took it up to the Fourth Circuit, U.S. Court of Appeals, and we had a 2-1 panel decision against us on that. We moved for rehearing en banc, and we had a split decision. Half the Fourth Circuit wanted to rehear the case because they didn't like the panel decision that ran against us, and then the other half wanted to keep it in place. It was a pure split decision on that. And, we had to pack up and go home. But, one of the core values that, my old firm instilled in me is like, just as long as you don't get out-lawyered on a case, you work your ass off, and that case I would do over and over again, 10 out of 10 times, knowing the result, because we were on the right side of history and we did not get out-lawyered. We didn't lose because we got out-lawyered. We lost because, the courts were not ready to recognize a student athlete's right and their talent. So,
well, that sounds like, incredible case, and it's a perfect example of, the risks of a plaintiff's practice. And maybe that's a good segue into where you are now. So about 7 months ago, you decided to go out and start your own firm. So tell me about that. What, pushed you to do that, and what's happened over the last 7 months. But I can start with what gave you the push to say, you know what, I want to do it on my own.
It's a great question because it wasn't an immediate thing for me. I never sort of walked in thinking one day I want to own my own law firm and I want to run my own practice. I think I just got to the point, and part of it too, I wanted to grow my practice and really bring in cases, bigger cases on my own and really kind of develop that marketing side of what I was doing at the other firm. And so I joined, Ben Glass and Brian Glass's group, Great Legal Marketing. And I started going to those meetings and I joined the mastermind program, which is fantastic. You're in a room, as you know, Jonathan, you're in a room with, 20 other lawyers from around the country, different practice groups, everyone's sharing ideas, pushing each other on how to really kind of develop things. And so I started getting all this great knowledge, but I was also the only person in the room who didn't own my own law firm. And so it was a little bit of an outsider where I was kind of academically learning all this stuff, but I didn't really have the platform to implement it all. So part of it was wanting to just sort of take a chance on myself, like take all this stuff. I knew I was a good lawyer. I knew I was confident enough in myself to do this. It was just more the mechanics of getting it done. And then being a part of Great Legal Marketing, sort of I learned a lot of the mechanics of it. And then it became a question of, well, do I really want to do this or not? Do I want to kind of pull the safety net and be responsible for myself? And, it's interesting because I think there's this perception among lawyers that if you're a W-2 employee and you work for another firm, that you've got this safety net, right? Someone's always going to bring you work, or you got to bring it in, but you're going to get paid. You're going to get your paycheck at the end of the day and, pay your mortgage and all that stuff. And that's important. But I think there's an unrecognized risk in there. And, I think just my career progression, starting from the trading floor to where I am now, has just been about recognizing and understanding risk and really sort of appropriately applying risk. And so the idea of starting out on my own at that point, 6 years of being a plaintiff side attorney, 16 years of practice total, I had just a fantastic background, I thought, to sort of launch this thing. Obviously the big issue is where you're going to get your cases and how that's going to go. So far, like I said, we're 7 months and 3 days into the law firm, and it worked out in terms of I had a number of cases that came with me, by sort of mutual agreement with my old firm, and they were great and gracious to allow me to continue working on some cases and on a fee split. And, some of the cases I'd been working on for years. And so that helped start things out. And I've had other cases come in from referrals, just the relationships built up over time. And that is really sort of, so far, it's sort of kept the hopper full. Maybe not full, but it's kept the hopper going. So I'm always looking to add cases.
A couple of things. I agree with you about the question of risk. A lot of lawyers, I've talked to a bunch, I hear a lot of them, they say it's too risky to leave. It's too risky to leave. Well, sometimes it's too risky to stay because, the client or the partner or the whatever that you rely on all of a sudden goes away and you have no control over what happens, and then you may be on the street anyway. So sometimes it's not that it's not risky at all to go out on your own, but at least you sort of control your destiny. And that's sort of my second observation as I look back on the thread of your background, your career, we'll call it. You weren't scared to take the risk. You moved to Chicago, working on the floor. That's sort of a risky career, I would say. And then 9/11 happened. You said, all right, I'm going to the Navy. And then you're like, all right, I'm going to go to law school. And then you move to DC and you're like, okay, I'm going to go to Charleston where I don't know anybody. And I'm going to switch practice areas. So it doesn't seem that far off that eventually you were going to start your own firm, right?
I guess if you look at it that way, probably not, not that far off. I guess I'm a little bit more comfortable with taking risk than maybe other people. But, at the same time, right? If you've got a great base of clients, you're generating your own business, then, the decision whether to start your own firm or not is really based on economics more than anything. If you don't have that, if you're reliant more on other people to bring in business, which you are at a big law firm, they're institutional clients. And then I think there's a lot of risk, to being a W-2 employee there, because eventually the music stops. In a practice area, like you said, somebody laterals to another firm, takes all the cases with them, then you're stuck thinking, well, do I go with them because that's who's feeding me or not? And so I really wanted to get out from underneath all that. And I want to be, I want to be responsible for myself, for bringing in my own cases and not have to to depend on others for that, I think. I turned 50 years old over the summer, and part of it, life is short. I think we get too focused a lot on just the day to day and the month to month of the practice of law. And you know how quickly time flies at this age and at this stage of your career. It just, years go by in a blink of an eye. And so if you don't stop and say, hey, wait a minute, is this a direction I truly want to go and where I want to wind up in 10 years, 20 years, then, you got to stop and ask yourself those questions, and for me, it's kind of, it's that old saying that if you're not the lead dog, the view never changes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big part of it for me too. It's like, okay, I'm not the lead dog working at somebody else's firm. And that's not a criticism of another firm. That's just the way it is. I mean, I'm the lead dog here in my firm. I'm the only dog here in my firm. So for whatever that's worth. But, it's sort of, I get to decide what direction I'm going to go in.
Let's talk about that for a minute. You're 7 months in. Nowadays, it may be the easiest time in the world ever to start your own law firm. With everything in the cloud, you can be virtual with all this stuff. You just really need a bar license and an internet connection, and that's it. You can start a law firm. But as you've, I'm sure, discovered in the last 7 months, it's after you sort of flip the switch and you've started the firm, it's not all easy after that. So, what's it been like getting it off the ground? From getting your website up to going out and getting cases, all that kind of stuff. How's it been over the last 7 months? And maybe how, has anything changed in terms of your mindset of what you're going about sort of doing to build the firm?
Yeah, it's definitely been incredibly busy. It's not, the benefit of working for yourself and starting your own firm is that you control your schedule, but you don't control what needs to get done. I mean, it's just, this morning I met with the CPA to, wrap up end of year stuff. On Saturday, I was in the office talking to I use FileVine for case management. I was talking to a paralegal out in California about implementing some different things and just learning about it. And so it's sort of constant work. And what I knew and what I expected was that I'm going to be spending more time sort of working on the business rather than in the business. But the amount of time it takes to do that. So like getting the website, okay, the web vendor is there to design your website, but they need content from you. So you have to sit there and write all the web pages and what you're going to do. You need to, continue to go out. You mentioned it before. Other people have told me, you got to go out and just have lunches with other attorneys and sort of go out, put yourself out there, continue to make connections. And so I spent a lot of time, just website, trying to get, backlinks to the website, because that's going to help with, the position when somebody here Google's, personal injury attorney near me, that I'm going to show up closer to the top of the pack. All those types of things you just have to do. And so certainly the barrier to entry, the bar is low to start your own law firm, because technology has wiped away, I think, most of the barriers for people. But you still have to do the work. And that's the real challenge. You're going through it. I still go through it. But, before I started my firm, I was always at, I was at 3 firms before I started my own. And, they were established firms, established platforms. You just sort of plug in. All the policies are written. You got all this staff. You've got everything you need is sort of there. And it's, the thing that's maybe the downside is it's hard to implement change because all these things are set, but they're all there. So then you start your own firm, and then, you have to do all that, like setting up a website. Once you set it up, you'll have to maintain it, but it's that first brick you got to lay. And then, I've brought on a number of employees, and every time I learn something new about onboarding the employees. I'm like, okay, next time I learn from this mistake, we'll do it better next time. But it's, I think intellectually I knew all this, but until you actually sort of go through it, you don't really realize all the little things that you have to do when you start your firm. And, I like it. It's fun. It can be stressful, but it's fun. It's a constant challenge. And I'm sure every day there's something new for you at this stage, right? Oh, absolutely. And, the benefit for me, or the one thing that I would recommend to anybody who's thinking about doing this, is you've got to start putting yourselves in rooms, going to conferences to understand the marketing aspect of it. Because Jonathan, you and I know, being part of, groups like Great Legal Marketing. I'm also in Charlie Mann's Catalyst program. There are so many resources and there's so many folks there who are just willing to help you. And when I'm talking about folks, I'm talking about attorneys and all around the country. And so when you sit in a room full of people and you're trying to figure out, well, how do I increase my, how do I sell myself to people in my market? How do I brand myself and do those types of things? You start hearing the same responses from people, from personal injury attorneys and family law attorneys and business attorneys and estate planning attorneys all over the country. And they all start telling you the same thing that works for them. And then you kind of realize like, okay, this has been tried and tested. This is how you do it. Here's the sort of the shortcut to doing it. Don't try to figure it out on your own. Go talk to this vendor over here. So like the website person. So Rick Martin, who's an IP attorney down in Evansville, Indiana, I reached out to him. And he knew I was trying to get a website going. He's like, why don't you just talk to my guy? And I did, and it got a fantastic website, without having to sort of figure out, how to do that from square one. Right. And so I got somebody for that, and you just start building these relationships and you just start putting word out there. Hey, I'm looking to do this, or here's my next challenge. Will you help, or do you have any suggestions? And then people just start telling you, hey, this is what I did. This is who you should talk to. And so it short circuits the process a lot. And the other thing too is it's hard. I mean, I think human nature takes over whenever we have this is true for me, a challenging task where I don't know where to start. I don't start. I do everything else but that one thing that I need to get done because I just don't know where to start. And the more you can recognize the weaknesses in your process that way, and then you can shore those up. So like you and I, we're in an accountability group. We talk every week. We say, okay, this is what I'm going to do in the next 7 days in my business. This is, the 2 or 3 discrete tasks that I need to get done to move my law firm forward. And you tell a handful of people those things and they tell you what they're going to do. And then you hold each other accountable for it at the end of that week. And then you go to these mastermind programs, same thing, sitting in a room full of people. I mean, I was at the Great Legal Marketing Mastermind and it was July of last year. And it was the thought of, okay, are you going to do this thing or not? Like, what are you doing? Are you going to start your own firm or not? And I said, well, yeah, I'm going to do it. I finally put it out there that yes, I'm going to do it. And then the next question is, well, when? Like, you're not, I'm sitting there in the hot seat in this room full of 25 other attorneys. They're all looking at me and they're not letting me go till I tell them when. I had to give them a date that I'm going to do this, no later than that. And I said, okay, well, this time next year. I gave myself a year, which is probably way too generous, deadline, right? But I gave myself a year and it ended up being like 9 months or so when I pulled the trigger and had that conversation with my old firm. But having people that will kind of push you forward, I think, is making sure you're surrounded by other attorneys who will do that, who will push you forward, hold you accountable. That, I think, accelerates growth more than anything.
The tough love and the accountability, I really like that. The other thing I like about groups like this is you see people sort of all along the spectrum. You see people that are where you are. You see people that are maybe a little behind you. You see people that are way ahead of you. And you can see how they've evolved and grown. And then you're like, okay, I can do that too. And everybody's there to help. I think the element of people not being competitors in your backyard, I think is always helpful because they're more likely to share. But even people in your own town will help you if you ask. And they've been there and they've made mistakes and, you're going to make your own, but it is nice to try to, like you said, shorten the learning curve a little bit. So, yeah. Well, okay. So you've been in it 7 months or so. Maybe it's too soon, but, any maybe lessons you've learned in the last 7 months, maybe something that you would not have done, or maybe something you would have done sooner?
I think I'm not one to look back and regret something I've done because I think there's always something to learn from it. And, 7 months is probably not long enough to have recognized that I did make a mistake. I'm sure I did. I wish I got my website up before on day one of the law firm, and it ended up taking months to get it done. And that was all on me. So, that pre-planning stuff, I should have done better. I think, really it's just going out. And I mean, there's some weeks where I'm like, man, I really should have met this attorney, or I should have sent that email, or set up this coffee, or set up this lunch, and I didn't do it. And, another week goes by and I haven't done it. And so I think some of those things where just life just gets in the way of your plans, you just have to just push through. I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, whatever's brought us here to today, has gotten us this far, and you just gotta keep pushing. I mean, that's what really life is. And so I think, understanding a lot of the marketing aspect is important too, understanding the Google, how Google works with SEO versus, you know, local service ads, and understanding, the difference between pay per click, and just understanding what backlinks are and what good backlinks are, versus bad ones, and understanding how the algorithm works. Because I think, even when you have a referral based business, people are going to be looking you up online. And so I think recognizing that is important.
So as you're sitting here today and you're looking forward over the next 10, 15 years, where do you want your firm to go? I know you're a trial lawyer, you try cases. Where do you see it going? Where do you want it to go?
I would love to, one of the first things I did, and it was a buddy of mine, Sean, he knew I wanted to try a case, and he reached out to me in June. So my firm had been open for maybe a month, and he said, "Hey, I got a trial coming up next week. Do you want to help out?" And I was like, "Man, I'm there. Just tell me when and where." And so we tried a little, short 2-day trial in Lexington, South Carolina, and we won. It was a great experience, just to get a rep in my firm, just doing a trial. And so it would be great to be able to do, 2-3 small trials a year, if that's possible. It's really difficult to kind of get those things scheduled, but even just helping out with other attorneys doing that. But in terms of my firm, I was thinking about it. I'm not trying to be the biggest law firm there is, right? I mean, there's already people. I'm not an advertising law firm. I'm not going to be on TV, radio, billboards. There's other folks who are doing that and who are doing it very well and bringing a lot of cases. And I'm happy to sort of take, their big cases, they refer out to me to do that kind of work. I think for me, the ideal setup is maybe having like 2 younger to mid-career attorneys who want to get a lot of experience, and having 2 attorneys work with me who are just anxious to get in the courtroom as much as possible and get that experience. And then, just having the appropriate number of, paralegals who are supporting and doing all that work, so maybe about a 4 or 5 person shop, at least where I'm sitting right now today by myself. And I'm looking for a paralegal right now. So I'm trying to increase the staffing from 1 to 2 as soon as I can. But that's where I see myself, because I don't want a massive headache, right? I want a good firm where we can all work, have trials, enjoy the life. And if we need to go home at 5 o'clock, man, just go home, go see your family.
I like it. Well, it's been fun over the last year and a half, watching you go out and watching your firm grow. So it's been fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. But last thing you mentioned earlier, I want to make sure we talk about it because I'm curious. You're a pilot. So tell me about that. How did you get into flying airplanes, and how often do you fly?
So I think I joke, I watched Top Gun, the original Top Gun, at a very impressionable age. I've always just loved aviation. I can't explain it. It's just something I've always, since I was a kid. And when I graduated law school, I took the Virginia bar in 2008. And a lot of people at the time were, you go take a bar trip. That was the thing. You go take 2 months off before you start your first legal job, and you go travel the world, or, whatever it is. And for me, I was like, no, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to learn how to fly, because I'll never have this amount of time ever again in my life to just focus purely on flying. So I did that for 2 months. I was out in Virginia just flying, 3-4 days a week, got my pilot's license, was renting planes for a while, then joined a flying club out in College Park, Maryland, and was flying a, Cessna 172 for a couple of years. And then I was able to get what's called a Piper Cherokee 6. It's a 6-seater single engine airplane, which I still have today. And I've got it hangared out here in Mount Pleasant, and I love it. I mean, I use it for work. I use it for family trips. I use it just for flying it for fun. Grab a buddy of mine, we'll go fly, shoot a bunch of instrument approaches at night. And I just love it. I mean, it's the one thing that if you truly want to separate yourself and get a mental separation and break from the practice of law or whatever it is that you're doing, just go fly. It is simultaneously the most relaxing and most intense thing that you can do.
That's awesome, man. So how often do you get out?
I try to go at least several times a month, right? And, it's like everything else. It's weather dependent. It's schedule dependent. It's based on what my family's got going on. If we have a busy weekend with a bunch of events, maybe I can't go flying that weekend. And then it's also if I'm just wiped out, and just too tired. I'm not going to go fly. But, I try to go. I've done a bunch of trips. I mean, I've got clients on the other side of the state, so instead of doing a 3.5, 4 hour drive, I've got an hour flight. I'll go fly out, go meet a client, come back. I'll go fly out for depositions. I signed up cases, client calls, they're 3 hours away. Okay. I'll meet you in a couple hours, drive out to the airport, hop in the airplane, go out and meet them, sit down with them face to face. And I think they very much appreciate that when you can do that, when you can show up when they need you to physically show up. And so it's been an advantage from that. But I just love flying. I mean, if I can, as much as I can, Jonathan, is I guess the best way to answer that.
That's cool. Well, you're going to have to take me up. I'm going to have to come out there. You have to take me up one time.
Yeah, man, let's do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. Colin, it's been fun, man. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for coming on. So for people out there that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
I think, go to my website. It's sctrial.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Instagram, civil.trial is where you can find me there. Those are probably the best places. So just reach out. I'd love to talk to anybody who's got questions or, maybe a year behind where I am today and they're about to start a firm and they're trying to figure out just the logistics of where you get your phone set up or, who do you use for this or that. Just give me a call, shoot me an email. I will hop on a call with you anytime.
Sweet, Colin. Enjoyed it, man. I'll see you in a week or so.
Yeah, we'll see you out in Virginia. Thanks, Jonathan. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.